"Who touched you?" said the Mafia boss minutes later. The whole city knew she wasn't just his maid. Subscribe to this channel if you're joining for the first time, and comment where you're watching from. It all began with one question that changed everything. A woman who only wanted peace met a man who controlled chaos. He never looked twice at her until that night. His voice cut through the silence, calm but heavy with something deeper. "Who touched you?" From that moment, her secret became his war, and love would never mean safety again. Before we continue, like this story and share it with someone who believes love can change even the coldest heart. Now, let's step back to where it all began. Pablo Vero lived in patterns so exact that even silence obeyed him. Every morning at 6, the mansion lights brightened on cue, his security team rotated through motion sensor zones, and the same cup of dark espresso waited beside a row of encrypted phones. Nothing surprised him anymore, not the markets, not betrayal, not death. Yet underneath that control lay the kind of vigilance born from guilt. He'd learned long ago that trust was a weapon, one his father had wielded poorly and lost everything for. Since then, Pablo treated affection like exposure. Even his smile was a calculation, measured for the room, never real enough to be mistaken for warmth. He built an empire in numbers and fear, but sometimes, when night drifted through the tall glass walls, he caught his own reflection and wondered whether he'd turned into the very ghosts he used to hunt. His name commanded meetings, silence, and favors, but it no longer commanded peace. Across the city, Ariel Porter woke before dawn to a different rhythm. The hum of the old heater, the clink of cleaning bottles against the sink, the soft ache in her wrists from the endless scrubbing. Once, those same hands had steadied dying patients, written prescriptions, held newborns. Now they polished silver and folded sheets for strangers. She'd come to Atlanta believing in second chances, but the city had its own terms for mercy. A nurse accused of negligence becomes a liability, and no one wanted to touch liability. Her ex-fiancé, the one who filed the complaint, had stolen more than her license. He'd stolen her faith that honesty could ever win against power. So she moved quietly, with her head down and her prayers taped to the bathroom mirror, tiny scriptures reminding her that dignity was something no one could confiscate. Each night, she told herself she was working toward a new beginning, though most nights it just felt like surviving until morning. The first time their worlds aligned was through necessity, not fate. Pablo's chief of staff had fired another maid for snooping through his study. The agency sent Ariel the next day. When she arrived, she stood in front of gates taller than any building from her old neighborhood. The guard scanned her ID without expression. Inside, the mansion smelled like expensive solitude, clean air, cold marble, no life. She carried her single suitcase and the silence that came with being invisible. The house manager explained the rules. Never enter the West Wing without permission, meals at set hours, no guests, no photos. Ariel nodded. She'd worked under stricter rules in hospitals. What she didn't expect was how quickly she'd feel the weight of being watched. The cameras didn't bother her at first, but she noticed how they turned slightly whenever she passed through hallways. Someone was always observing, even when unseen. Pablo noticed her before he meant to. On his security feed, she was different from the others. No gossiping in staff quarters, no small talk in the kitchen, no nervous glances toward his office. She moved with precision, not fear. The first note he made in his private file wasn't about background checks or reliability. It was one word: disciplined. He told himself that's all it was, a managerial observation. Still, he began timing his routine to cross paths with hers, curious about the quiet that followed her into every room. One evening he caught her humming softly while dusting his collection of antique watches. It was a hymn, old and gentle, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it irritated him. Maybe because it reminded him of his mother's voice, the last memory before the arguments, before his father disappeared into debt and betrayal. He shut his laptop harder than necessary and turned up the music system, drowning out the hymn, pretending the sound didn't matter. Days bled into weeks. Ariel worked with a kind of thoroughness that left no trace of herself behind, except the small kindnesses she thought no one noticed. Fresh flowers in the guest room, a folded blanket left on the couch after a late meeting, the way she left coffee exactly how he liked it even though no one had told her the details. Pablo found himself irritated again, this time by the comfort she created. It disrupted the efficiency of his isolation. He told Dante, his cousin and security chief, to run another background check, insisting it was precaution. Dante laughed, saying, "You're scared of a maid now?" Pablo didn't answer. He just stared at the report until the words blurred, searching for anything that justified the unease pressing against his chest. There was nothing, no record, no lie, no threat. Just a woman trying to live quietly. And somehow that was the most unsettling truth of all. Ariel, meanwhile, was learning the language of the house, the way footsteps echoed differently when Pablo was near, the rhythm of his closed-door meetings, the rare laughter from Dante that meant good news. She stayed out of sight, but sometimes curiosity betrayed her. Late one night, she passed by the open office door and saw Pablo standing by the window, his expression unreadable, phone pressed to his ear. "If Mateo calls again, tell him the answer's the same," he said. His voice was calm, but the tension in his hand as he adjusted his cufflinks said otherwise. Ariel didn't understand who Mateo was, but the name lodged itself in her mind. She moved away before he could notice her, though she felt the cold ripple of his presence long after she reached the service quarters. The mansion functioned like a machine, until the morning she cut her hand on broken glass. It was nothing severe, a small slice from a fallen vase, but the sight of blood startled her. She reached for a napkin, pressing it against her palm, unaware that Pablo was watching from across the hall. He walked over. The first time, he'd closed the distance between them voluntarily. "You should get that looked at," he said. His tone was measured, like an order disguised as concern. "I've had worse," she replied, trying to smile. "Still," he said quietly, "don't let it scar." For a man who rarely spoke more than directives, the softness in his voice felt like intrusion. She nodded, murmured thanks, and hurried away, heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with pain. That exchange lingered with both of them. Pablo found himself thinking about the resilience in her eyes, the way she dismissed pain like an inconvenience. It mirrored his own habits, control through endurance. He began noticing the details, how she tied her hair before starting work, how she checked the locks each night before turning off the lights, how she murmured small prayers under her breath. He envied that certainty, that quiet belief in something beyond survival. In his world, faith was leverage, not comfort. One evening he asked, half mocking, "Do those prayers ever work?" She looked at him, unflinching. "They keep me human," she said. He almost smiled. "That's dangerous in this city." "So I've heard," she answered, walking away. For the first time in years, someone had replied without fear or flattery, and it left him unsettled. The walls between employer and employee began to blur in subtle ways. He started asking her opinion on small matters, wine choices for guests, the new art shipment, testing her judgment. She answered honestly, sometimes bluntly, never guessing that each response chipped at his armor. When Dante teased him about it, Pablo dismissed it as practicality. Yet when Ariel was late one morning due to a storm-blocked road, he caught himself pacing near the kitchen, checking the time more than once. When she finally arrived, drenched but calm, he said nothing, just handed her a towel. "You didn't have to wait up," she said. "You didn't have to come," he replied. The air between them thickened with words neither dared to speak. That night, Pablo reviewed surveillance footage again, watching her move through rooms that had long felt lifeless. For the first time, the mansion didn't seem so empty. Ariel sensed a shift too, but couldn't name it. Pablo's presence grew heavier, not hostile, just present. He started greeting her by name, something he'd never done with staff. "Good morning, Miss Porter," he'd say, and she'd respond, "Morning, Mr. Vero." Each exchange was brief, but charged with awareness. The other employees noticed and whispered, though never within earshot. Ariel tried to ignore it, focusing on work, reminding herself that attention from men like him was dangerous. Yet a small part of her, the part still aching from years of invisibility, felt seen. That scared her more than his power ever could. One evening, she found a book left on the counter, an old medical text she once mentioned missing after losing her license. There was no note, but she knew who had placed it there. She opened it, tracing her initials written years ago on the inside cover, and whispered to the empty room, "Why me?" For Pablo, the answer was unclear even to himself. He told Lucia Mendez, his lawyer, that Ariel was efficient and worth keeping. Lucia raised an eyebrow. "Efficient or distracting?" she asked. He ignored the jab, but her words lingered. "Distracting." That was the problem. He couldn't afford distraction. Yet when he closed his eyes at night, he saw the way Ariel had looked at him when she said her prayers kept her human. He hadn't been human in years, and the memory scraped at something long dormant. He remembered his father's voice. "Power protects nothing if it owns you." Back then he thought it was weakness. Now he wasn't so sure. He found himself questioning why he built walls, so high only to stare over them at someone who lived with nothing but dignity. Their unspoken connection deepened quietly until one afternoon when Pablo returned early from a meeting. He found Ariel cleaning the study, standing before a shelf of his late mother's records. She froze, realizing she'd stepped into forbidden space. "I was just dusting," she said quickly. "I know," he replied. He walked closer, stopping beside her. "My mother used to play these. Haven't heard them in years." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Would she mind if you did?" He looked at the turntable, the layer of dust, and then at her. "She'd think I finally remembered her," he said. The record spun, a faint melody filling the air. For a moment, the mansion felt like a home. Neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't distance anymore. It was recognition. When the song ended, he said quietly, "You can leave that playing when you clean here." It was permission, but also a confession disguised as instruction. From that day, something invisible tethered them. Pablo's empire still demanded ruthlessness, yet every time he saw Ariel's calm defiance, it chipped away at his certainty that cruelty was the only way to survive. She, in turn, began seeing glimpses of the man beneath the headlines. The one who stayed up late reading contracts not for greed, but for fear of losing control. They were two people shaped by loss, orbiting each other in a world that punished vulnerability. Still, neither crossed the line. Not yet. Their restraint became its own kind of intimacy, quiet but charged, each moment another thread binding them toward inevitable collision. One evening, as rain whispered against the windows, Ariel caught her reflection beside Pablo's in the glass. He was behind her, speaking to Dante about a shipment, his tone clipped, decisive. Yet when he saw her glance, his voice softened mid-sentence. Dante noticed, smirked, and excused himself. Ariel turned to leave, but Pablo said, "You don't have to disappear every time I walk in." "I thought that's what you preferred," she answered. "It used to be," he admitted. The honesty startled them both. She nodded slowly, then whispered, "People change." "Some don't," he said. "Some can't." She looked at him a long moment before replying. Then, maybe they just haven't met the right reason. She left him standing there, words echoing in the quiet room, and for the first time, Pablo Vero, the man who could predict every threat, felt completely unprepared for what came next. And that night, as he stood alone in his office, he realized that the most dangerous thing in his world wasn't Mateo Cruz or the empire he'd built. It was the possibility that a maid with nothing left to lose might teach him how to feel again. Night fell over Atlanta with the kind of stillness that follows tension, the air heavy yet charged as business cars lined the long driveway of the Vero estate. Inside, music floated through chandeliers while men in dark suits discussed markets that were anything but legal. Pablo Vero moved among them with that calm authority that made others lower their voices. Every gesture he made carried the quiet precision of a man who calculated outcomes before anyone else saw them coming. He was waiting for a deal confirmation when the knock at his office door interrupted the rhythm. A staff member whispered that the new maid had been told to bring the ledgers from storage. Pablo nodded absently, eyes still fixed on a screen filled with wire transfer data. The door opened, and Ariel Porter stepped inside, holding a folder against her chest like armor. She hesitated, seeing him for the first time up close, the kind of presence that filled the room before words arrived. He looked up slowly, assessing, neither inviting nor dismissive. "Set it there," he said, voice even, accent faint but sharpened by years of command. She crossed the carpet carefully, aware of the sound of her own shoes against marble, placing the folder on his desk before retreating a single step. He noticed the deliberate composure, how she avoided shrinking under his gaze. Most employees tried not to breathe in his office. This one met silence with silence. "You're new," he said without looking up again. "Yes, sir." "Started this week," she answered. "From where?" he asked, scrolling his screen though his attention had shifted to her tone. "Midtown Agency," she replied. "They said you needed help organizing records." He glanced up briefly, eyes narrowing as if testing truth through restraint. "What's your name?" "Ariel Porter." "Ariel," he repeated, letting the syllables hang. "You're thorough?" She nodded. "I try to be." He gave a half smile, brief, unreadable. "Good. In this house, half measures cost lives." The words landed heavier than she expected. She didn't know if it was humor or warning, and he didn't clarify. Minutes passed while he reviewed documents, the tension thick yet oddly balanced. She turned to leave when the sound of his pen dropping made her pause. "Wait," he said. "You missed a page." She returned, bending to collect it. The faint scent of his cologne, clean, restrained, expensive, brushed her senses. When their eyes met again, something indefinable shifted, not attraction yet, just recognition. She straightened quickly, handing him the paper. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost human. She gave a small nod and started toward the door, whispering half to herself, "Some stains never come off, sir." He looked up sharply. "What did you say?" "Nothing," she said, startled she'd been heard. He studied her face, realizing it wasn't defiance, it was experience. "I'm sure you'll find most things do, if you scrub hard enough," he said. "Maybe," she answered. "Depends what left the mark." He almost smiled again but stopped himself, turning back to the ledger. When she left, he watched her reflection in the glass until the door clicked shut. Pablo poured a drink he didn't need, thinking about her words. Some stains never come off. They echoed louder than the deals being made downstairs. He had met countless people who wanted something from him, money, favor, security, but she'd spoken without intent. Her remark came from somewhere personal, maybe pain. He recognized that tone because it used to be his own before he learned silence paid better. Dante entered the room unannounced, raising an eyebrow at the untouched glass. "You good?" he asked. "Fine," Pablo said too fast. "The maid seems brave," Dante teased. "Didn't flinch around you." Pablo ignored the smirk. "Run another background check." "She's clean. Agency verified." "Run another," he repeated. Dante chuckled, exiting with a shrug, but Pablo stayed frozen, staring at the spot where Ariel had stood as if the air itself remembered her more vividly than he wanted to admit. Downstairs, Ariel stacked empty glasses, pretending not to notice the whispers of other staff who warned her to avoid the boss's floor. She had seen men like him before, too polished, too quiet, always holding power like a blade wrapped in silk. Yet something about him unsettled her. Not fear exactly, more like recognition of another person used to living behind armor. Later that night, while cleaning the study, she caught sight of framed photos turned face down. Curiosity tempted her, but she resisted, sensing that some histories were better left undisturbed. When footsteps echoed behind her, she froze until his voice broke the tension. "You're still here." She turned, startled but composed. "I wanted to finish the glass cases." "Most people wait until morning," he said. "I prefer finishing what I start," she replied. He regarded her quietly, almost approvingly. "You're disciplined," he said. "Learned it the hard way." That the only way it sticks, he answered, surprising himself. She wasn't sure whether to respond. Instead, she focused on rearranging the crystal figurines, aware of his gaze lingering longer than appropriate, yet not predatory. Curious. You can lock up when you're done, he said, heading toward the door. Thank you, Mr. Vero. He paused, turning slightly. You're the first to say that without sounding afraid. Should I be? She asked softly. He studied her a beat too long. Only if you ever lie to me. Then he left. Ariel exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath, her pulse uneven. She told herself it was just nerves, but something in his tone carried a truth she couldn't name. By morning, Pablo had already reviewed every detail of her file again. Nursing degree, dismissed license, no criminal record. One complaint, false, later dropped. The pattern suggested resilience, not deceit. He admired that, though admiration felt dangerous. He caught himself wondering what she'd endured to keep that quiet strength intact. When Lucia Mendez called to discuss an investment transfer, he cut the conversation short. We'll handle it later, he said. You never postpone money, Lucia replied. Today I do. He ended the call without explanation. It wasn't business distracting him anymore. It was a woman folding sheets somewhere downstairs who didn't belong in his world, but somehow steadied it. Ariel noticed small changes around the mansion. Orders came with fewer words, and when she passed him in the hallway, he acknowledged her presence with a nod instead of the usual indifference. One afternoon, while she dusted the gallery, he stopped beside her, examining a painting of an old cathedral. You like that? He asked. The colors remind me of peace, she said. There's no peace in that story. The painter killed himself before finishing it. Maybe he saw peace somewhere else, she replied. He looked at her, expression unreadable. You always see the better version of things? It's the only way to stay alive, she said. You sound like someone who's learned that lesson too. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, quietly, maybe I forgot how. She met his gaze, and neither moved until Dante's voice called from the hall, breaking whatever fragile moment had formed. That night, Pablo stood on his balcony, phone pressed to his ear while rain hissed against the railing. Mateo Cruz's name flashed on the screen before he answered. You think you can hide from me behind accountants? Mateo sneered through static. Stay out of my city, Pablo said evenly. It's still my blood running through those streets, Mateo replied. Don't forget who taught you to build empires. Pablo hung up, jaw tightening, eyes drawn toward the faint light in the servants' quarters where Ariel's shadow moved behind curtains. The contrast struck him, her small life inside his vast corruption. For the first time, he wondered if the empire was worth what it demanded. The next day, she brought fresh linens to his office while he reviewed ledgers. Leave them by the door, he said automatically, but she lingered. You look tired, she said. He glanced up, surprised by her straightforwardness. Long day. People always say that when it's been a long life, she replied. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You read minds now. Just faces, she said. They tell on people more than words do. What does mine tell you? He asked. She hesitated. That you don't sleep well. And that you've already forgiven someone who doesn't deserve it. The words hit deeper than she could know. He stared at her, then said quietly, Be careful. Honesty like that can get you hurt. I've been hurt worse for less, she answered, meeting his eyes before leaving him alone with truths he hadn't wanted voiced. Hours later, Pablo found himself pacing. Her insight irritated him, because it was right. His father's betrayal still gnawed beneath success, and Mateo's existence kept reopening the wound. Yet a stranger, a maid, had read it like handwriting. He poured another drink, muttering, What do you see, Ariel Porter, that the rest of them can't? The next morning, he saw her outside tending to the garden, sleeves rolled, focused. The image unsettled him in ways he couldn't define. For a man who controlled everything, losing emotional balance over something so ordinary felt dangerous. He told himself to stop watching, but didn't. A week later, the mansion hosted another meeting. Ariel moved discreetly through guests, serving drinks, avoiding the business talk that reeked of intimidation. When one guest brushed against her arm too deliberately, she pulled back, murmuring, "Excuse me." Pablo saw the exchange from across the room. His eyes hardened. The guest laughed, unaware of the warning he'd just earned. After the meeting, Pablo cornered the man near the exit. "Touch my staff again, and you'll leave without fingers," he said, voice calm enough to terrify. The man stumbled with an apology. Dante witnessed it, whispering afterward, "That was new." Pablo brushed him off, but inside, he knew something had shifted. The boundary between professionalism and protection was gone. Later that night, Ariel knocked on his office door.
"You didn't have to do that," she said.
"Do what?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Scare that man. People talk." "Let them," he said. "You work under my roof. No one disrespects that." "It's fine, Mr. Vero.
Eva handled vers."
He looked at her hand, noticing the faint bruise near her wrist. "Where'd you get that?" "It's nothing." "Answer me," he said, sharper than intended. She met his stare. "An accident." Dish slipped. He knew she was lying, but pressed no further. "Be careful," he said quietly. "I can handle myself." "I'm starting to believe that," he murmured. She left, unaware that the question forming in his mind, "Who touched you?" would one day ignite a chain reaction that neither of them could control. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her voice, her defiance, the bruise, all tangled in thoughts he couldn't shut off. For years he'd mastered detachment. Now it betrayed him. He went to his desk, pulled her file again, and stared at the old photograph of her as a nurse, smiling, hopeful. He traced the date of dismissal, realizing how easily power destroyed innocence. Maybe that was why he couldn't ignore her. Maybe protecting her was his subconscious attempt at redemption. But even that realization terrified him, because caring for anyone made him vulnerable, and vulnerability was fatal in his world. Down the hall, Ariel prayed quietly, unaware that her name had just become the first unguarded thought in a man's mind who hadn't prayed in decades. The mansion slept, but both of them lay awake, one haunted by guilt, the other by curiosity. Two worlds that should never have met now revolved around a single unspoken question, tightening like gravity. By morning, nothing between them felt the same. From the morning after that first collision, something unspoken began threading through the mansion. Pablo Vero's world ran on control, yet he found himself anticipating the faint sound of Ariel's footsteps in the corridor more than the daily financial reports his empire relied on. He told himself he only watched her to maintain order. Every new employee required observation. But the cameras told a different story. Each night, he'd glance at the feed and linger for a moment longer than necessary, noting the quiet precision of her work, the steadiness in her hands, the way she never hesitated even when alone in vast, echoing rooms. There was no vanity in her, no curiosity about his wealth, just discipline and fatigue wrapped in grace. He admired that, though admiration wasn't something he allowed himself often. Power demanded detachment, but lately detachment felt like dullness. Something about her reminded him of how silence used to mean peace before it became proof of guilt. He wondered how a woman could carry so much restraint and still look free. Ariel didn't notice the scrutiny at first. The mansion had cameras everywhere. She assumed it was protocol. What she did notice, however, was how Pablo's tone changed whenever he spoke to her. The harsh brevity that ruled his conversations with his staff softened slightly around her. "You missed a spot," he'd say, but the comment carried none of the usual edge. Once, when she apologized for dropping a glass, he surprised her with a simple, "It happens." No one had ever heard him say that before. She chalked it up to mood, not realizing that her calmness had begun unsettling a man who had terrified seasoned criminals. Each evening after finishing her tasks, she returned to her small quarters, wrote in her worn journal, and prayed quietly for another chance at rebuilding her life. Pablo, without knowing it, had become a part of that prayer, an obstacle and a possibility she refused to define. Then came the storm. Atlanta's skies split open one night, thunder shaking the foundation while power across the city flickered out. Most of the staff panicked, rushing to secure the property. Ariel, however, lit candles and continued cleaning as if the darkness didn't exist. Pablo walked into the hall, flashlight in hand, pausing when he saw her kneeling by the dining table, calmly wiping water that had seeped through the windows. "You're still working?" he asked. "The mess doesn't care about the weather," she replied. He watched her for a moment, the light from the candle painting her face in amber tones that felt almost human against the mansion's steel-gray walls. "Take the night off," he said. She shook her head. "If I stop now, I'll have more to fix later." "You don't have to prove anything," he told her. "Maybe not," she said, "but I do it for me." He didn't respond, just nodded once before leaving, though her words followed him like the echo of something he'd forgotten: self-respect. The next day, he ordered new security protocols and had her granted limited access to restricted areas. "She's trustworthy," he told Dante when questioned. Dante smirked. "You sure that's your reason?" Pablo ignored him, but the question lingered. Trust was a foreign concept in his world. Yet every test he gave her, handling sensitive files, organizing his late mother's art collection, receiving deliveries without supervision, she passed without error. No gossip, no mistakes, no curiosity about his secrets. When Lucia Mendez visited to review a contract, she noticed the shift instantly. "You're letting her handle documents now?" she asked, disbelief coloring her tone. "She works quietly," he said. Lucia narrowed her eyes. "Quiet people are the ones you should listen to most carefully." Pablo simply replied, "Exactly." Over time, their interactions became more conversational, though never casual. He'd ask, "How long have you lived in Atlanta?" And she'd answer with polite brevity. Once, she mentioned her nursing background, and for a fleeting moment, something in his chest tightened. "Nurse, huh? That's a long way from scrubbing floors," he said. "It's still about cleaning up after people," she replied dryly, earning a rare chuckle from him. The sound startled them both. She smiled faintly, then turned back to her work, leaving him wondering how laughter could feel heavier than silence. He began finding excuses to be near the spaces she cleaned, checking inventory, rearranging his schedule so meetings overlapped her duties. Dante noticed, shaking his head. "You're watching her like she's a stock you can't predict." "She's efficient," Pablo replied curtly. "Yeah, efficient at getting under your skin," Dante said, walking away before the glare could stop him. As days passed, Ariel started sensing his presence even before he entered a room. It wasn't fear but awareness, the kind that hums beneath the skin when something bigger than logic begins forming. She respected him, yet couldn't understand why he seemed to study her every movement. One afternoon, while preparing coffee for guests, she accidentally burned her finger. She winced, running cold water over it, when his voice startled her. "Let me see." She turned, unsure how he'd appeared without a sound. "It's fine," she said. "Let me see," he repeated, softer but firm. She extended her hand reluctantly. He examined the small burn, then reached for a first aid kit from the counter. The gesture felt oddly personal for a man who rarely touched anyone. "You could have called someone," he said, wrapping the bandage. "I've handled worse," she replied. "You always have to," he said quietly. Their eyes met, and for a split second, neither could move. The air thickened with words unsaid, and when she pulled her hand back, he let go slowly, as if afraid something might break if he held on too long. Later that evening, he reviewed footage from the day, but paused at the moment he treated her hand. Watching it replay felt wrong, too intimate, too real. He closed the monitor, muttering to himself, "You're losing discipline." Yet instead of sleeping, he poured a drink and stood by the window, the rain reflecting memories he thought long buried. His father's betrayal, Mateo's laughter when power changed hands, the hollow victories that came afterward. None of it had ever made him feel alive. But the way Ariel had looked at him, neither afraid nor impressed, felt like oxygen after years of breathing smoke. He hated that realization, but he couldn't ignore it. Ariel, in her room, replayed the moment too. She wasn't naive. She knew how men in power could blur boundaries. But something about Pablo Vero didn't align with the rumors whispered among staff. He was ruthless, yes, but not careless. He watched, he calculated, but beneath that precision, she sensed fatigue, a man tired of himself. She prayed again that night, whispering, "Lord, if I'm meant to help him, let it be without losing myself." Her voice trembled slightly, because part of her feared that help often cost more than people expected. The next morning, she found an envelope under her door. Inside was a brief note in his handwriting. "You're needed in the West Wing today. Don't discuss this with anyone." She hesitated, heart beating faster, unsure whether it was an order or a test. In the West Wing, she discovered an entire library sealed off for years. Dust covered the shelves, and faint outlines of furniture marked where sunlight hadn't touched. Pablo entered quietly behind her. "My mother's collection," he said. "I want it restored." "Why now?" she asked. "Because it deserves it," he said. "Or maybe because you do," she murmured without thinking. He looked at her, expression unreadable. "You're honest to a fault, Miss Porter." "Better that than living behind lies," she said. "Lies keep people alive," he replied. "No, they just make dying easier," she countered. He almost smiled, shaking his head. "You argue like you're not scared of me." "Should I be?" she asked softly. "Depends who's asking," he said. From that day, the library became their quiet intersection. While she worked, he lingered nearby under the pretense of sorting archives. They spoke about nothing and everything: faith, loyalty, loss. Once, she mentioned the man who'd ruined her career. He said love was just another kind of control, she said.
Pablo nodded slowly. "He's not wrong," he said.
"Love makes people reckless."
"Or brave," she said.
"Sometimes it's the same thing." "No," he replied, voice low. "Reckless people don't survive in my world." "Then maybe our world needs changing," she whispered. The word startled him. No one had ever spoken to him that way. He didn't answer, but later, when alone, he replayed her tone, wondering why truth always sounded like hope when she said it. Lucia Mendez noticed the change before anyone else. "She's getting close to you," she warned during a meeting. "That woman could destroy everything if she talks." Pablo leaned back in his chair. "She won't." "You're betting your empire on a Maid silence?" Lucia pressed. He looked at her steadily. "I'm betting on her integrity." Lucia exhaled sharply. "You don't believe in integrity."
"I didn't," he said.
"Now I'm not so sure." When she left, he realized how absurd it sounded. A man who once built fortunes on blackmail now placing faith in someone he barely knew. But absurd or not, it was happening. That evening, a small crisis tested that fragile trust. A missing file, one linked to Mateo's old operations, vanished from his safe. Panic spread through his inner circle. Dante accused a courier. Lucia blamed security. Pablo stayed silent until he checked camera logs and saw Ariel had entered the office briefly that afternoon to deliver cleaning supplies. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he called Dante. "No one questions her," he ordered. "Not yet." He confronted her himself later that night. "You were in my office," he said. "Yes," she replied calmly. "You told me to leave the invoices on your desk." "Did you touch anything else?"
"Just the desk," she said.
He studied her face for a long second. "You're sure?" "If I was going to steal something, I'd have taken your coffee machine," she said lightly. He blinked, then laughed, an involuntary, genuine sound that broke the tension. "You're either the most honest person I've met or the most dangerous." "Maybe both," she said. "Guess you'll have to find out." Hours later, Dante reported the file found in a mislabeled folder. Pablo said nothing, just watched the monitors showing Ariel finishing her rounds, unaware of how close she'd come to losing his trust, and how that possibility had unsettled him more than any financial loss ever could. That night, he turned off the cameras for the first time in years. He didn't want to see her through screens anymore. The next morning, he saw her in the courtyard, sunlight hitting her face as she watered the plants. For a moment, he stood there quietly, thinking how control had once been his greatest weapon but now felt like a cage he'd built around himself. When she noticed him and said, "Good morning, Mr. Vero," he responded without calculation, "Morning, Ariel." The sound of her name from his mouth startled them both. From that day forward, the mansion felt less like a fortress and more like something fragile trying to remember how to breathe. Pablo still ran his empire, still issued orders, but beneath every decision lingered a new motive, one he couldn't define but couldn't deny. Ariel sensed it too. The power between them was shifting, subtle yet irreversible. And somewhere deep down, both knew that whatever was growing in that silence would soon demand a price neither of them was prepared to pay. The morning the package arrived, the air inside the mansion felt unusually still, as if the walls were waiting for something to happen. Ariel noticed the delivery sitting by the front door, unmarked, wrapped in brown paper, heavier than most. The guard said it was for Mr. Vero, but his instructions were to leave all correspondence unopened until he returned. She hesitated for a moment before deciding to move it to his study, unaware that this single act would change everything she thought she understood about the man upstairs. She set it on his desk, meaning to leave it alone, but when she reached for a cloth to wipe away the damp ring left by the morning rain, the corner of the wrapping tore. A dark stain had already bled through the paper. She froze, recognizing the shape beneath. Sharp edges of a photograph, slick texture that didn't belong to anything ordinary. Her breath caught as she peeled back a corner. Inside, a picture stared back, her ex-fiancé, smiling with the arrogance she'd tried so hard to forget, standing beside another man whose name she only knew from whispers in staff hallways, Mateo Cruz. The message underneath was brief, scrawled in black ink. "We keep what's ours." For a moment, her mind refused to accept what she was seeing. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself before realizing she was no longer alone. Pablo stood by the doorway, watching her with that unreadable calm that always unnerved people. His voice was measured, low. "You opened it?" She turned, guilt flashing across her face. "It was damaged, I thought." "You thought it was your place," he said, stepping closer, his tone not harsh, but stripped of warmth. "That name," she stammered, pointing at the photo, "Mateo Cruz. You know him?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm what she already suspected. "Yes," he said finally. "He's been my problem for a long time." "My problem too," she shot back. "That man standing next to him. That's the one who ruined my life." "You knew him?" He studied her, eyes narrowing as if calculating what truth she could handle. "I knew of him," he said quietly. "Knew what he did, and who he did it for." She blinked, her heart pounding harder now. "You're saying my ex worked for Mateo?" "Worked," Pablo repeated, almost to himself. "Owned is a better word." Ariel stepped back, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You knew. All this time. You knew who he was." "I didn't know about you," Pablo said. "Not until later." "When?" she demanded. "Before I got here, or after?" The silence that followed was its own confession. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "So, I'm just another file in your cabinet, another secret you thought you could control?" He met her gaze without flinching. "You think control is what this is? That I brought you here for amusement?" "You tell me," she snapped. "Because right now, I can't tell whether you're my employer or my captor." For the first time, his composure cracked. "I brought you here to keep you alive," he said sharply. "Mateo had your name. You were already on a list. I made sure no one could reach you." "By lying to me?" she asked. "By protecting you," he said. "There's a difference. Protection built on lies isn't safety," she whispered. "It's a cage." He exhaled slowly, as though choosing honesty cost him something tangible. "The night you came to work here, I'd already traced the money your ex took from Mateo's accounts. He was running from both of us, using you as cover. When he disappeared, Mateo assumed you still had his assets. I couldn't let him reach you before I did." "So you hired me?" she asked. "To what? Keep tabs on me?" "To keep you breathing," he said, softer now. "You were an equation I couldn't balance until I saw you in person." And then, he stopped, searching for words he didn't want to admit. "Then what?" she pressed. Then I couldn't see you as leverage anymore. The quiet that followed was heavier than any argument. Ariel turned toward the desk, staring at the photograph again. You should have told me, she said. You should have given me the choice. Choice is dangerous in my world, he said. It gets people killed. Then maybe you shouldn't live in a world where people have to die to keep you safe, she said, her voice breaking slightly. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to the window, his reflection fractured in the rain-slick glass. You think I enjoy this? He asked. You think any of this is about pride? I don't know what to think anymore, she said. You're kind one moment and cruel the next. You say you're saving me, but all I see is someone who plays God with people's lives. He turned, eyes dark. And yet you're still here. Because I need the paycheck, she shot back. Don't mistake desperation for loyalty. He gave a humorless laugh. You think money is what this is about? Then what is it? She asked. He hesitated, then said quietly, guilt. The word landed between them like a confession neither wanted to claim. I let Mateo destroy people for years, he continued. When I finally tried to stop him, it was too late. So yes, maybe this is guilt. Maybe it's redemption. Or maybe it's just selfish, wanting to believe I could save at least one person from what I built. Ariel swallowed hard, tears threatening but restrained. I didn't ask to be your redemption, she said. I just wanted a job. He nodded slowly. And I just wanted peace, he said. But apparently, neither of us knows how to find it. She stared at him, trying to reconcile the man before her with the rumors she'd heard. He looked powerful, yes, but tired, haunted by choices that had cost him more than money. So what happens now? She asked finally. You'll stay, he said, until I can make sure Mateo doesn't try again. And if I don't want to? Then you'll leave with a target on your back, he said plainly. And I'm not going to let that happen. She folded her arms. You can't keep me here. No, he said. But I can make sure no one else gets to you either. She studied him for a long moment, searching for manipulation but finding something stranger, sincerity. You think control and care are the same thing, she said. They're not. Maybe not, he replied, but they're the only language I know. For hours after, the mansion felt colder. Ariel packed a small bag, not because she planned to leave, but because she needed the illusion of choice. Downstairs, she overheard Dante speaking to Pablo in hushed tones. She's a risk, Dante said. Mateo already knows she's with you. That photo wasn't a warning, it was bait. I'm aware, Pablo said. Then what's the plan? We prepare, he said. If Mateo wants a war, he'll get one. And the girl? Dante asked. She's the reason there'll be one, Pablo replied. So we protect her at all costs. Ariel stepped back before they could see her, heart pounding, realizing that whatever war they were discussing wasn't metaphorical. She returned to her room, gripping the photo tighter, whispering to herself, What did you get me into? That night, Pablo knocked softly on her door. May I? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He stepped inside, holding 2 cups of tea. It's late, she said. I don't sleep much, he replied. Figured you don't either. She accepted the cup cautiously. I still don't trust you, she said. You don't have to, he answered. But understand something. I've done terrible things in my life, but lying to you about this wasn't one of them. I didn't want to drag you into it. And yet here I am, she said quietly. Here you are, he echoed. You could have walked away that night you found out something was wrong. But you didn't. Because I didn't know how deep it went, she said. Now you do, he replied. So, what happens when I walk away tomorrow? You won't, he said simply. Because you care enough to see how it ends. You sound awfully sure of me, she said. I'm not sure of anything anymore, he admitted. Except that Mateo won't stop until one of us is gone. The rain continued outside, steady, relentless. For the first time, she saw the man stripped of his legend. The businessman, the rumored criminal, the strategist who built walls higher than anyone could climb. Standing there with nothing but exhaustion in his eyes. What happened between you and Mateo? She asked softly. We built something together, he said. Then he sold it to the highest bidder, every name, every account, every family tied to us. My father was one of them. Mateo had him killed when I refused to sign away our operations. I've been waiting for the right moment to finish it ever since. And you think protecting me is part of that? She asked.
No, he said.
That's the part one can't explain. She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. You're either the best liar I've ever met or the loneliest man I've ever seen. He smiled faintly. Maybe both. The clock ticked softly, each second stretching like the space between them. She placed her cup down. I don't know if I can stay, she said. You can, he replied. And you will, until it's safe. Safe, she repeated, almost laughing. There's no such thing in your world, is there? No, he said. There isn't. But I can try to give you something close. You can't fix people, Pablo, she said. You can't save me to make up for losing them. Maybe not, he admitted. But I can make sure no one else takes what's mine. The word hung heavy, dangerous in its tenderness. I'm not yours, she said firmly. No, he said after a pause. But I wish you were. When he left, she stood there trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that underneath all his control, Pablo Vera was a man trapped between two prisons, the one he built for survival and the one her presence had created in his heart. She closed the door slowly, leaning against it, whispering, God help us both. Down the hall, he stopped, looking at the untouched cup she'd left behind on the tray, the same one she'd barely touched the first night she arrived. He picked it up, staring into the steam as if it held answers he could never say aloud. By morning, the city would wake to a new headline about a murder tied to Mateo Cruz's network, and Pablo would realize the game had shifted again. But tonight, in the quiet before the next storm, two people stood on opposite sides of truth, one trying to escape it, the other learning to live with it, and both too entangled to turn back. Before you continue, subscribe if you haven't already, like this story, and share it with someone who believes love can change even the coldest heart. Where are you watching from? Drop your locations in the comments below. And if you made it to this point, right? I am still here. Let's see who's still watching. The day Ariel left the mansion, the city felt heavier than usual, its sky thick with late summer humidity that promised another storm. She had made up her mind in silence, packing her few belongings into a small duffel and slipping out before dawn. But decisions made in fear rarely end where we expect. Halfway across town, she began to notice the same black sedan in her mirror, too patient to be random. Her pulse quickened. She turned down side streets, cut through a grocery lot, tried to shake the feeling of being followed. But when she reached the train station, the car was there again, idling near the exit. That's when she realized Pablo's warnings hadn't been exaggeration. She texted the one person she swore she'd never reach out to again. You were right. Someone's watching me. Less than 10 minutes later, a message appeared from an unknown number. Don't move. Stay where the cameras can see you. She looked up at the station monitors, and for a moment, it felt like invisible eyes had found her even here. Then she heard the low growl of an engine behind her, and his car pulled up to the curb. Pablo stepped out without his usual calm composure. Get in, he said. I can handle it, she protested, gripping her bag. Not this time, he said, opening the door. His tone wasn't commanding. It was weary, urgent, the voice of a man tired of watching people die because of pride. She hesitated, then got in. The moment the car doors locked, his driver sped off. They were Mateo's men, he said. How do you know? She asked. Because I trained half of them, he replied quietly. You shouldn't have left alone. I couldn't stay there knowing you lied to me, she said. Lies kept you alive, he answered. Until now. She looked at him, anger and fear warring in her chest. So what now? Now, he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. We disappear. The safe house was nothing like the mansion. It was small, hidden in a quiet neighborhood with peeling paint and creaking floors that spoke of a different kind of life, a life without luxury, but maybe one closer to truth. Pablo stayed near the window for hours, watching the streetlights flicker. Ariel unpacked slowly, her movements careful, unsure whether she felt safer or more trapped. "How long do we stay here?" she asked. "Until I find out how far Mateo's reached," he said. "You really think hiding fixes anything?" she said. "It buys time," he replied. "And time keeps people breathing." "You sound like you've done this before," she said. He gave a humorless smile. "Too many times." Then quieter. "Never with someone who didn't deserve it." She looked at him for a moment, the edge in her voice softening. "You think I deserve saving?" "I think you deserve peace," he said. "But peace doesn't come cheap." Days passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the fridge and the occasional phone call from Dante checking in. Pablo barely slept, his face growing more drawn each day. Ariel watched him from across the small kitchen, wondering how a man who ruled an empire could look so ordinary when stripped of it. "You don't eat enough," she said one morning, sliding a plate toward him. "You don't stop worrying," he said. "I can't," she replied. "Not until I know what you're really fighting for." "You think it's power," he said, setting down his fork. "But it's not. It's the ghost of it, the illusion that if I can fix what Mateo broke, I can undo who I became because of him." "You can't undo it," she said softly. "You can only decide what to do next. That's what scares me," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "For the first time, I don't know what comes next." That night, the rain returned, steady and rhythmic against the roof. Pablo sat on the couch, staring at old photographs scattered across the table. Pictures of men now dead or missing, contracts signed under names he no longer recognized as his own. Ariel joined him quietly, holding a small candle between them. "You ever think about leaving it all?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "Then why don't you?" "Because people like me don't get to walk away. We just fade slower than others." She studied him for a long moment before asking, "What happened to your father?" His jaw tightened. "He trusted Mateo," he said finally. "Believed they could clean the business together, make it legitimate. Mateo used him, drained everything, and when my father found out, he signed his own death warrant. They made it look like suicide." She reached out instinctively, placing her hand over his. "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Don't be. I've built empires on vengeance. That doesn't earn sympathy. It earns understanding," she said quietly. He turned his hand over, their fingers barely touching, the kind of contact that feels like confession more than comfort. "You shouldn't trust me," he said. "Too late," she whispered. "You've seen what I am," he said. "No," she corrected. "I've seen what you've survived." He looked away, voice rough. "You don't know what that survival costs." "Maybe not," she said, "but I know what it's like to lose everything and still have to wake up." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was fragile, the kind that holds truth in its breath. When she finally moved her hand away, he caught it halfway, their eyes meeting in quiet defiance of everything that made their closeness impossible. He released her slowly, like a man afraid of breaking something irreplaceable. Over the next few days, they found rhythm in the hiding. She cleaned and cooked, he strategized and monitored. Yet the line between necessity and connection began to blur. One morning, she found him asleep at the table, maps and reports spread around him, gun beside his arm. She took the weapon gently and set it aside. When he stirred, she said softly, "You can't fight every battle awake." "If I sleep," he murmured, "I dream." "Then dream better," she said. He smiled faintly. "That's not how my head works." "Then change it," she said. "Start with one thing you can forgive." He studied her face. "What if I can't?" "Then I'll forgive it for you," she said. For a man who trusted nothing, those words were both a promise and a threat to everything he believed about strength. One night, they argued. It started over nothing, the danger of staying in one place too long, the risk of trust. "You don't understand," he said. "This isn't about us hiding. It's about what happens when we're found." "You mean when you are found," she corrected, "because you think everything in this world revolves around your guilt." He glared at her, his voice rising. "My guilt keeps people alive." "No," she said firmly. "It keeps you alone." He stepped closer, the heat of anger masking something deeper. You think this is easy for me? I'm trying to protect you. No, she said again, tears burning at the edge of her voice. You're trying to control what you can't bear to lose. The words hit him like a gunshot. He turned away, exhaling hard. You have no idea what it's like to carry blood on your hands. You're wrong, she said. Because every time I look at that hospital report, every time I see the name of the patient I didn't lose but still got blamed for, I carry it too. Different kind of blood, same kind of guilt. For the first time, he looked at her not as someone he needed to protect, but as someone who understood him. They didn't speak for hours after that. When dawn broke, he found her on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the street below. You're still here, he said quietly. I said some things I shouldn't have. So did I, she replied. Maybe we both needed to hear them. He nodded slowly. You're not scared of me anymore, are you? Should I be? She asked. You'd be the first who isn't, he said. Then maybe that's why you need me here, she said. Not because you're protecting me, but because you finally met someone who sees the man behind the monster.
He shook his head.
There's no man left to see. You're wrong, she said, turning to face him. I saw him when you wrapped my hand, when you told me about your father, when you stayed up watching a street that never stops taking from you. And what did you see? He asked. A man who's tired of being afraid of love, she said. The words hung between them, too heavy to ignore. He took a step closer. You shouldn't say things like that. Why? She asked. Because you might believe them? He exhaled sharply. Because I already do. Before either could move, the sound of an engine echoed outside. He drew his weapon instantly, peering through the blinds. Dante? She asked. No, he said. Different car. The tension snapped back like a wire pulled too tight. Stay behind me, he ordered. Pablo? Do it, he said. The car idled, then drove off after a long minute, leaving only tire marks on wet asphalt. He lowered the gun, his pulse loud enough for her to hear. She stepped closer. You can't live like this forever, she said. I already have, he replied. Not anymore, she whispered. Because now I'm here, and I won't let fear be the only thing that owns you. He looked at her then. Not like a bodyguard, not like a sinner seeking penance, but like a man who'd finally found something worth losing everything for. That night, the distance between them vanished completely. They sat by candlelight again, exhaustion melting the last defenses. He told her about the first man he ever killed, about how he stopped seeing faces afterward. She told him about the night she lost her license, the patient she couldn't save, the fiancé who turned her grief into a weapon. Each confession drew them closer, not because of comfort, but because truth demanded proximity. When she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away this time. You ever wish for a normal life? She asked. Every damn day, he said. And you? I used to, she said. Now I just want a true one. This is as true as it gets, he murmured. Then I guess it's enough. He looked at her like someone seeing light for the first time after years underground. Then, without words, he kissed her. It wasn't desire. It was exhaustion and honesty tangled together, two people finally finding silence that didn't hurt. When morning came, the world didn't look different, but something inside them had shifted. Pablo stood by the window, watching the street while Ariel made coffee. You regret it? She asked quietly. No, he said. You? No, she replied. But it scares me. Good, he said. Real things always do. For the first time, he smiled. Not the cold, calculated smirk the city knew him for, but something unguarded, fleeting, human. Yet beneath that calm, both knew it wouldn't last. Because outside their fragile sanctuary, Mateo Cruz had already made his move. By the end of the week, blood would be spilled again. Not from vengeance, but from the price of loving someone in a world where love was never supposed to survive. It started with silence. The kind that fills a room not because there's peace, but because something has shifted, something fragile has cracked. The story of Pablo and Ariel had always existed on the edge of danger, but now it teetered between loyalty and betrayal. News of their whereabouts had reached the wrong ears. What began as whispers online became headlines. Ariel Porter, the mysterious woman linked to the billionaire crime figure Pablo Vero. The article featured a blurred photo of her leaving the safe house, eyes downcast, unaware that Lucia Mendez had been the one who leaked it. Lucia had convinced herself she was saving Pablo from himself, that Ariel was a weakness that could destroy him. But in truth, it was jealousy, fear of losing her influence, that made her dial the journalist's number. When Pablo found out, it was too late. The damage had already spread across every screen in Atlanta. That morning, Ariel sat by the window, the small television in the corner of the room playing the story over and over again. Her picture flashed next to Pablo's face, the headline cruelly bold, "The Maid and the Mafia King, Secrets Behind Atlanta's Hidden Empire." Her stomach twisted as the reporter speculated on everything from her past to their so-called affair. She turned off the television and whispered to herself, "They're calling me what I ran from." Pablo entered just as she said it. His voice was low, tense. "I'll handle it." "Handle it how?" she asked sharply. "By threatening people again? Paying them off. You can't erase what's already out there." "You think I won't try?" he said. "You think I'll let them destroy you?" "Destroy me," she said bitterly. "They already did when you let me get dragged into your war." He stepped closer, eyes hard. "I didn't let anything happen to you." "No," she said quietly. "You just didn't stop it." The argument carried the weight of everything they hadn't said. "You don't understand," he told her. "If they know who you are, Mateo knows too." "Then maybe he already did," she said. "Maybe this is what happens when people try to fix what they broke." "You think this is my fault?" he asked. "I think you brought me into something I didn't agree to," she said. "You made me part of your guilt. You were already part of it the day you opened that package," he said coldly. Her eyes filled but didn't fall. "Then maybe I should have never walked into your house." "Maybe you shouldn't have," he replied before he could stop himself. The words landed like a blow neither could take back. She turned away, voice shaking but controlled. "I'll be gone by morning." "You won't last a day out there," he said. "Then at least it'll be on my terms," she said. That night, Pablo called Dante. "Get Lucia," he ordered. Dante hesitated. "She's the one who—" "I know what she did," Pablo interrupted. "Just bring her." When Lucia arrived, she didn't deny it. "She was a liability," she said. "You're losing focus. Everyone sees it." Pablo leaned against the desk, his jaw tight. "You think leaking her photo fixes that?" "It exposes the problem," Lucia said. "And maybe it saves your life." "You didn't save me," he said, his voice like steel. "You just made sure she'll never trust me again." Lucia frowned, realizing too late what line she'd crossed. "You can't afford to feel, Pablo," she said. "That's what got your father killed." He turned away, his tone calm but lethal. "Get out." She hesitated, searching for a hint of mercy, but found none. "You're making a mistake," she said. "No," he replied. "I made it the day I thought trust could exist in this world." Meanwhile, Ariel packed her things quietly. Every sound felt amplified. The zipper, the click of her phone charger, the weight of her breath. She looked around the room one last time and whispered, "I was never safe here." She walked to the door, but before she could leave, Pablo appeared in the doorway. "You're not going," he said. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore," she said, not even looking at him. "You'll get yourself killed," he warned. "Then maybe that's what's meant to happen," she said. "You can't keep living like every person you love has to be hidden." "I don't hide people I love," he said, the words slipping out before he could catch them. She turned slowly. "Then what was I?" He looked at her, torn between pride and truth. "You were the one thing I didn't plan for." "That's not love," she said softly. "That's possession."
"No," he said.
"It's fear. And it's the only language I've ever known." She stepped closer, tears trembling but voice steady. "Then learn another one, Pablo. Because whatever this is, it's breaking both of us." He reached out, but she moved back. "Don't," she said. "Not unless you mean it." "I've never meant anything more," he said, but she shook her head. "Then prove it by letting me go." She walked past him, leaving the door open behind her. He stood there for a long moment, listening to her footsteps fade until they were gone. Dante entered a few minutes later. "She's gone," he said quietly. "Yeah," Pablo said, his voice hollow. "And she's not coming back." Dante studied him. "You could go after her." "No," Pablo said. "If I do, she'll never believe anything I say again." Days passed. The news didn't stop. Photos of Ariel appeared everywhere, every angle, every speculation. She stayed at a church-run shelter downtown under a different name, helping in the kitchen to keep her hands busy. The women there didn't ask questions, they just let her exist. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the window and didn't recognize the woman staring back. "You can't keep hiding forever," the head nun said kindly one night. Ariel smiled faintly. "I'm not hiding," she said. "I'm healing." But even as she said it, her heart betrayed her. She missed him. The sound of his voice, the stillness between his words, the way he carried sorrow, like it was a language only she could read. Back at the mansion, Pablo was unraveling quietly. He stopped attending meetings, stopped answering calls, and spent most of his nights staring at the security feeds that once made him feel in control. Every frame felt empty without her. Dante confronted him. "You can't sit here waiting for a ghost," he said. "I'm not waiting," Pablo replied. "I'm trying to remember who I was before she walked in." "And?" Dante asked. Pablo exhaled. "I don't like that man anymore." "Then change," Dante said. "You think I don't want to?" Pablo shot back. "You think I don't replay every word I said to her?" "Then stop talking about it and do something," Dante said. "Go fix it." Pablo looked at him, eyes hollow. "You can't fix what's been turned into a headline." One night, Mateo's message arrived, an untraceable voicemail, a voice dripping with mockery. "You always were sentimental," Mateo said. "You think you can hide her forever? She's already mine. You just don't know it yet." Pablo played it again and again, rage and fear colliding in his chest. He called Dante immediately. "Find her," he said. "Whatever it takes." "You told her you'd let her go," Dante reminded him. That was before he threatened her. Dante hesitated. "And what happens when you find her? You think she'll want to see you." "I don't care what she wants," Pablo said, his voice trembling with something close to despair. "I just need to make sure she's alive." 2 nights later, Dante located the shelter. Pablo drove himself there, parking across the street, watching through the window as Ariel served food to a group of homeless men. She looked calm, almost at peace. He didn't go inside. He couldn't. He just watched her for a while, remembering how she used to move through the mansion, quiet but sure, as if order was the only thing holding her life together. He stayed there until one of the nuns noticed him and walked over. "You can't stay here," she said. "She deserves her peace." He nodded, whispering, "I know." When he drove away, Ariel looked up briefly, sensing something. For a moment, she thought she saw his car. But when she blinked, it was gone. Weeks turned into months. The city forgot her scandal, but she didn't forget what it taught her. She began counseling other women at the shelter, helping them file for restraining orders, find housing, regain their dignity. Each time she guided someone towards safety, she thought of him, the man who taught her that even the strongest people can lose themselves when love turns into protection. But she also thought of his face the night she left, the look of someone who'd finally realized that power without love is nothing but noise. Back in his office, Pablo stood before a photo of his father, speaking quietly as if to an old ghost. "You were right," he said. "This life doesn't end until someone walks away." He paused, his reflection fractured across the glass frame. "So, I walked away. But she was the one who showed me how." For the first time, he understood that control had been his way of hiding from loss, and letting her go had been the first act of honesty in years. He closed his eyes, whispering, "If love ever finds her again, I hope it's nothing like me." But fate wasn't finished with either of them. Across town, Mateo watched from a distance, his plans tightening like a noose. The photo leak had been the beginning, not the end. His message to Pablo hadn't been a taunt. It had been a warning. And soon, both would learn that sometimes walking away doesn't save you. It just changes the battlefield. The city never truly sleeps, but that night Atlanta felt like it was holding its breath. Pablo had gone days without rest, pacing between screens in the control room of his empty mansion. Every lead, every whisper, every piece of intel came up the same: nothing. Ariel had vanished, and with her, the last piece of calm he'd ever known. Dante stood near the doorway, arms crossed, voice low. "You need to stop before you collapse," he said. "Mateo's smarter than this. He wants you desperate." Pablo didn't look up. "He already has me desperate." "Then think," Dante said. "You train me to read the board. If you were Mateo, where would you take her?" Pablo leaned over the table, scanning the map like a battlefield. He wouldn't risk downtown. Too many eyes. He'll use the freight yard, the old one off Simpson Road. The police cleared it years ago. Dante nodded grimly. "You sure?" Pablo's eyes narrowed. "I'm sure. That's where he killed my father." Across town, Ariel's hands were bound behind her, wrists raw from the rope. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of an old fluorescent bulb flickering above. Mateo sat across from her, his tailored suit too clean for a man surrounded by dust and rusted iron. He spoke casually, almost kindly. "You know, when I saw your picture in the paper, I thought, finally, something that gets under his skin." Ariel kept her gaze steady. "You think this is about me?" Mateo smirked. "Everything's about you now. He built an empire on control, and then you came along and took it without even trying." She said nothing, which irritated him more than any insult could. He leaned closer. "He'll come for you. That's what men like him do. They come to destroy or to die trying." "Then maybe you should be afraid," she said quietly. His smile faltered for just a moment. "You really don't know who you're dealing with." "Neither do you," she said. Back in the car, Pablo loaded his gun with steady hands, every movement mechanical, ritualistic. Dante sat beside him, checking the comms. "You sure you want to do this without backup?" "Backup slows me down," Pablo replied. "Mateo wants a war, he'll get one. But we're ending it tonight." "And the cops?" Dante asked. "Let me worry about them," Pablo said. "They'll come when it's over." "You mean when we're dead?" Dante muttered. Pablo gave a faint smile. "You've always been the optimist." Dante exhaled, then said softly, "You really love her, don't you?" Pablo paused, his jaw tightening. "I don't know if I even understand what that word means anymore. But she made me remember the man I wanted to be before all this." "Then make sure that man walks out of there alive," Dante said. At the freight yard, Mateo's men patrolled the perimeter, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Ariel sat quietly, calculating, her nurse's mind assessing angles, exits, behavior. She noticed one of the guards checking his phone repeatedly, distracted, tired. When he walked close, she whispered, "He's coming." The man frowned. "Who?" "The one you should have never crossed," she said. He scoffed, but for a moment, uncertainty crossed his face. She leaned forward, her voice low. "He doesn't forgive twice." That second of hesitation was all she needed. She slipped the small pin she'd hidden in her sleeve, taken from Mateo's jacket button earlier, and began working on the ropes. They didn't notice. They never expect the quiet ones to be the dangerous ones. Outside, tires screeched against wet concrete. Pablo stepped out, gun drawn, rain soaking through his coat. The sound of metal doors echoed across the yard. "Mateo," he shouted. "Let's end this." Mateo's laughter came from somewhere above, carried through the rafters. "You still think you call the shots, brother?" he called. "You should have stayed in your mansion. This isn't your world anymore." Pablo's eyes scanned every shadow. "You always were a coward hiding behind noise." Mateo's voice sharpened. "Funny coming from a man who hides behind a woman." That line hit its target. Pablo fired once, the bullet sparking against the metal beam. "You say her name again," he said evenly, "and I'll burn this place with both of us inside." Dante flanked left, taking down two guards quietly, their radios crackling before silence reclaimed the yard. Inside, Ariel's ropes finally gave way. She slipped her hands free, heart pounding, and looked around for anything she could use. On a nearby table sat Mateo's phone, still recording. She pressed a button and saw her own face appear on the screen. The camera had been live the whole time. Her voice shook as she spoke into it. "If you're watching this," she said, "know that I'm not the story they made me. I'm not his weakness. I'm his reminder that even monsters can choose mercy." She left the phone recording and slid it under a stack of papers where no one would notice. Then she moved toward the side door, keeping low. Pablo entered the main corridor, his footsteps slow, deliberate. "You took everything from me," Mateo said from above. "My money, my men, my city." "No," Pablo said. "You took those from yourself. I just stopped pretending we were family." Mateo stepped into the light, gun in hand, eyes wild with pride. "And she's the reason you forgot who you are."
Amad, Pablo.
"That's who you threw it all away for." Pablo didn't blink. "She's more human than you've ever been." Mateo raised his weapon. "Then let's see how human you really are." The gunfire cracked through the warehouse. Sparks lit the dark like fireworks. Dante shouted from the far end, returning fire. The air smelled of gunpowder and rust. Ariel ducked behind a crate, covering her ears as bullets tore through the walls. She spotted Dante through the chaos and shouted, "He's upstairs." Dante nodded and motioned for her to stay down. "I'm not staying here," she said. "I can end this another way." He started to argue, but she was already gone, sprinting toward the staircase. Upstairs, Mateo circled the catwalk, reloading. "You think you're smarter than me, Vero?" he yelled. Pablo's voice echoed from below.
No.
"Just more tired." Mateo laughed, but his hand trembled slightly. When Ariel appeared at the top of the stairs, Mateo turned in shock. "You," he sneered. "You don't get to play hero." She held up the phone she'd taken. "You already made me one," she said. "You confessed to everything." He blinked, realization dawning too late. "You were recording," she nodded. "Every word." Below, Pablo shouted, "Ariel, get down." Mateo fired wildly, bullets slicing through the railing. Ariel ducked, crawling along the edge until she reached the control panel for the floodlights. She slammed the switch, blinding everyone in the room. In that flash, Pablo took his shot precise, clean, disarming Mateo without killing him. The gun clattered to the floor. Mateo fell to his knees, clutching his arm. "Do it," he hissed. "You've wanted this since the beginning. End it." Pablo approached slowly, his gun still raised. "You kill my father," he said. "You destroyed everything I built." Mateo smiled, blood on his teeth. "And you'll do the same to her. It's what we are." Pablo hesitated, then lowered the gun.
No.
"It's what you are." He tossed the weapon aside and turned to Ariel. "Call the police," he said. "They'll want a confession." Dante appeared at the doorway, bruised but alive. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. Ariel knelt beside Mateo's dropped phone and replayed the video. His voice echoed through the speakers, every threat, every boast recorded clearly. "You'll never be free of me," he said in the recording. "I own every cop in the city." The irony hung heavy as blue lights flashed outside. Pablo looked at her, relief and grief intertwined. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "We did." The police stormed the building, guns raised, shouting commands. Pablo didn't resist when they cuffed him. "It's over," one officer said. "Yeah," Pablo murmured. "It's over." As they led him past Ariel, he paused. "You kept your promise," he said quietly. "You didn't need saving." She smiled faintly, tears glinting in her eyes. "Neither did you," she said. "You just needed to stop running." He nodded once, a look of quiet acceptance crossing his face. When the officers pushed him toward the car, Dante whispered to her. He wanted it this way. He said if he ever got the chance to do something right, he'd take it. Ariel watched as the doors closed behind Pablo, the sound echoing in her chest like a heartbeat she couldn't stop hearing. Hours later, The warehouse stood silent again, police tape fluttering in the wind. Ariel sat on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the sunrise cutting through the city skyline. A detective approached. "You're free to go," he said. "Your statement checks out. That recording will put Mateo away for good." "What about him?" she asked softly.
Vero?
The detective shrugged. "He's taking the fall for half the things Cruz did. But between you and me, he won't be in long. Men like him, they always find a way to come out cleaner than they should."
She shook her head.
Not this time. When she was finally alone, she pulled out the pendant Pablo had given her, a simple silver charm he'd said once belonged to his mother. Inside was a tiny photo of him as a boy, smiling before life hardened him. She whispered, "You kept your word." Then she stood, walking away from the flashing lights toward the city that had once devoured her and now felt strangely new. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Pablo sat in an interrogation room, cuffs resting loosely around his wrists. Across from him, the same detective leaned back in his chair. "You know, most people would have killed him," he said. "Why didn't you?" Pablo looked at the table for a long moment before answering. "Because she was watching," he said. "And for once, I wanted her to see something worth believing in." The detective nodded slowly. "That recording she made saved more than your reputation."
Pablo smiled fondly.
"It saved me too." As dawn fully broke, Ariel stepped onto the quiet streets, the city humming back to life. Somewhere across town, Pablo was being transferred to county jail, his empire dismantled piece by piece. But in that ruin, something new had been built, not power, not control, but something rare and fragile: redemption. And though they stood on opposite sides of freedom, both understood the same truth: love doesn't always rescue. Sometimes it rebuilds after everything burns. And in that silence between sirens and sunrise, the war ended. Not with victory, but with peace neither had believed they'd ever earn. 6 months had passed since the night that redefined everything. The city had quieted, as if even its chaos had grown tired of itself. Pablo Vero walked through the gates of Fulton Federal Detention Center, his steps slower, his shoulders slightly lower than before. The world outside felt unfamiliar, too bright, too fast. He no longer had men waiting at the curb, no convoy of black sedans, no whispers following him like shadows. All that remained was silence, and the faint memory of her voice telling him to stop running. The guards called after him one last time, "You're free, Vero," but he didn't feel free. Freedom, he thought, wasn't walking out of a gate, it was walking back into something worth living for. He caught a ride to the edge of Buckhead where his mansion stood, the same house that once commanded the city's respect and fear. Now it was a relic of what he used to be. The front gates were open. The gold V on the iron crest had been replaced by a new sign, Porter Foundation for Women. He stood there for a moment, unsure if he should laugh or cry. The garden was full of people, women talking, laughing softly, some holding their children, others carrying folders. They looked alive, safe, and free. None of this had existed before her. As he approached the door, a young volunteer greeted him politely. "Can I help you, sir?" He hesitated, then said, "No. I'm just visiting an old friend." Inside, the house no longer smelled of cigar smoke or expensive cologne. It smelled like coffee and fresh paint. The grand staircase he used to descend every morning now had photographs lining its walls, women shaking hands, women speaking at podiums, women rebuilding their lives. He followed the sound of laughter to the old dining hall. Ariel was there, sitting at the head of the long oak table, papers spread out before her. Her hair was longer now, her clothes simple, her smile softer but stronger. For a second, she didn't notice him. He stood still, unsure of what to say. When she finally looked up, her expression didn't show surprise, only a quiet recognition that felt like peace. "Did you really think I wouldn't find my way back here?" he said softly. She closed the folder in front of her and replied, "I wasn't sure you'd want to." "I didn't," he said, stepping closer. "But I couldn't stay away." There was a pause, one that carried every unspoken apology between them. "How long have you been running this?" he asked, gesturing to the room. 5 months, she said. The city granted us funding. We help women who've been through abuse or exploitation. Some of them worked for your rivals, some were just collateral damage. They needed somewhere to start over. He nodded slowly. You did all this alone? She smiled faintly. No one builds anything alone, Pablo. You taught me that. He sat across from her, his voice quiet. And what about you? Did you start over? I'm trying, she said. Some days it feels like I did. Other days I still wake up thinking I need to clean the marble floors before sunrise. He laughed softly. Those floors never looked the same after you left. Maybe they weren't supposed to, she replied. The air between them felt different now, lighter, but still charged with everything they'd been through. He studied her hands, the same ones that once shook when she held that broken glass, now steady and sure. I don't deserve to be here, he said. Then why are you? She asked. Because I wanted to see what love looks like when it's done right, he said. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. You don't have to prove anything to me anymore. Maybe I'm not trying to, he said. Maybe I just need to know you're okay. I am, she said gently. But you look like you left something behind in there. He exhaled deeply. I left behind everything. The empire, the money, the people who called me sir. None of it mattered after that night. The only thing I couldn't leave behind was the sound of your voice telling me to let go. She leaned back, her expression softening. Letting go is harder than surviving, she said. You learn that when you lose everything twice. He nodded slowly. You think we lost everything? No, she said. We just stopped pretending it was love when it was really control. He smiled faintly, not in defense, but in understanding. You were right, he said. I didn't love the right way. I thought protecting meant owning. I thought giving meant taking away choice. You were the first person who made me question that. And what did you find? She asked. That love doesn't fix people, he said quietly. It shows them who they are when no one's watching. She nodded. Then maybe that's why we worked for a little while.
Did we? He asked.
Work. She gave a small smile. We survived each other. That counts for something. He reached into his pocket and placed a folded letter on the table. This is everything I own, what's left of it anyway. The house is yours. The rest of the funds are already under your name. The lawyers know. She blinked, surprised. Why would you do that? Because I took enough from the world, he said. It's time to give something back. You can do that without disappearing, she said softly. I'm not disappearing, he said. I'm just done being the man I used to be. Then who are you now? She asked. Someone who wants to learn peace, he said, even if it's from a distance. For a moment, the room felt like it had no time, just two people suspended between memory and forgiveness. Do you regret any of it? She asked. He looked at her with the honesty of someone who'd finally stopped lying to himself. Only that it took you to teach me what love costs. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. It cost both of us, she said. But maybe that's why it was real. He reached across the table slowly, resting his hand near hers without touching. Ariel, he said softly, you changed everything I thought I knew. If you ever need me, she stopped him gently. I don't need you to protect me anymore. I just need you to be okay. He nodded. I will be. But it's strange, isn't it? How the same house that trapped us now feels like freedom. They sat in silence, listening to the hum of distant laughter from the other room. Then she said, Do you remember the night you asked me who touched me? He closed his eyes. I remember every word. That was the first time I realized you still had a heart, she said. And I hated you for it because I didn't want to see it. Why? He asked. Because it made me care, she said quietly. And caring made me vulnerable. I promised myself I'd never feel small again. You never were, he said. You just didn't believe it yet. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's what love really is. Someone seeing who you are before you do. Then I guess I loved you more than I thought, he said. The clock on the wall ticked softly. She glanced at it, then back at him. You know, there's a class starting in 10 minutes, self-defense training for survivors. You should stay. We could use someone who knows how to fight. He chuckled. I think my fighting days are over. Maybe not, she said. Maybe now you just fight for something different. He thought about that, then stood. I'll think about it. You always do, she said with a knowing look. And then you leave. He hesitated, his hand on the back of the chair. Would you stop me if I did?
No, she said.
Because love isn't supposed to hold people hostage. He walked toward the door, stopping once more to look back at her. For what it's worth, he said, you were never just my maid. And you, she said, smiling gently, were never just my boss. Their eyes met, holding that familiar charge, less like fire now, more like quiet recognition. As he stepped outside, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, washing the room in warmth. He stood in the driveway for a moment, looking up at the mansion that had once been his kingdom and now belonged to something purer. Dante pulled up in a modest sedan, rolling down the window. You sure you're ready to go? He asked. Pablo looked at the house one last time. For the first time, yeah. Where to? Dante asked. Anywhere the noise can't find me, Pablo said. Inside, Ariel watched from the window as the car disappeared down the long driveway. She didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, thank you, not for what he'd given her, but for what he'd finally understood. She turned back to the women waiting for her, ready to begin the next session. All right, she said, her voice firm but kind. Let's get started. We've got a lot to rebuild. The women gathered around, their faces eager, their laughter filling the halls that once echoed with fear. Ariel felt something stir inside her, a sense of peace she'd never known. Across town, Pablo looked out the window of the car as the city skyline receded. You think she'll forgive you? Dante asked. Pablo shook his head. She already did. She just didn't say it out loud. Dante nodded. And what about you? You ever going to forgive yourself?
Pablo smiled fondly.
Maybe not today, but I'll get there. You really done with this life? Dante pressed. This life, Pablo said, ended the moment she looked at me like I was still human.
Dante didn't reply.
The road stretched ahead, endless and open. Pablo leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about control or power, just peace. And somewhere between the city he built and the woman who rebuilt him, he finally understood that love was never about possession. It was about the courage to let go. The morning light crept softly through the open windows of the mansion that had once been filled with secrets. Now it was alive with voices that carried laughter instead of fear. Women moved through the halls, some cooking, some talking quietly, others just sitting together, no longer alone. The house that had once been a fortress for a man running from his conscience had become a refuge for women, rebuilding their lives. And at the center of it all stood Ariel Porter, a woman who once cleaned these floors, now walking through them as the founder of something bigger than she ever imagined. She paused near the grand piano, her fingers tracing the edges of its polished wood, remembering the nights she scrubbed beneath it while he sat upstairs, unreachable. Life had come full circle, but this time, the power didn't belong to fear. It belonged to healing. In another part of the house, Pablo Vera was walking slowly through what used to be his office. The walls no longer held maps of operations or blueprints of his empire. They now carried framed letters from survivors. Women thanking the Foundation for helping them escape violence. He ran his hand over one of the frames, reading the words softly under his breath. You showed me I wasn't worthless. He smiled faintly. For a man who had once controlled empires, these simple sentences felt heavier, more valuable than all the money he had laundered or the power he once commanded. When Ariel entered the room, he didn't turn at first. He just said quietly, I used to think legacy meant being remembered by men who feared me. Now I see it's the ones who heal, because of you, that keep my name alive. She smiled gently.
No, Pablo. They heal because of themselves.
We just gave them a place to start. He turned to her, studying the woman who had once been his silence, and now was his voice. You look at peace, he said. Not quite, she replied. But peace doesn't mean there's no pain left. It just means I stopped letting it own me. He nodded. That's something I'm still learning. You will, she said softly. One day, you'll wake up and realize you've stopped replaying the same moment in your head. He exhaled deeply. You mean the one where I asked who touched you? No, she said, looking at him kindly. The one where you finally decided to care. The two stood quietly for a moment, listening to the faint hum of conversation drifting through the hall. The foundation's opening ceremony was only an hour away. Reporters would be arriving soon, city officials too. For years, Pablo had avoided cameras. Now, he'd chosen to stand beside Ariel as she dedicated the mansion to those whose stories the world had overlooked. But before the day began, they shared a silence that wasn't awkward or tense. It was full of gratitude for surviving the kind of love that had broken and remade them both. If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, and share to your loved ones to protect them from the same tragic happening to them in the future. Outside, the garden was bursting with color. The roses Ariel planted months ago had finally bloomed, and volunteers were setting up chairs beneath the old oak trees. For Pablo, the sight felt almost unreal, a life he never thought he'd deserve. He turned to Ariel and asked, "Do you ever think about leaving this behind? About starting somewhere new, away from all the reminders?" She smiled. "Every day. But if I left, I'd be running for my purpose, not toward peace. I used to think my pain was punishment. Now I know it was preparation." Her words lingered in the air like a quiet sermon. He said softly, "I wish I'd had your faith." "You didn't need faith," she said. "You needed truth. And you found it the hard way, by losing everything that lied to you." The first cars arrived. The mayor's office had sent representatives. Local news crews were setting up cameras. It wasn't about publicity. It was about testimony, living proof that redemption didn't have to look glamorous to be real. Ariel stepped outside to greet the guests, and as she did, she caught sight of one of the women the foundation had helped, a mother with her teenage daughter. The woman smiled, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Ariel squeezed her hand, whispering back, "You did this yourself." The girl beside her handed Ariel a folded paper, a drawing of a woman standing tall beside a man with gentle eyes. At the bottom, it read, "Love can change monsters into men." Ariel smiled, not realizing Pablo had been watching from the doorway. He approached slowly, his voice low. "They see something in me I still don't. Then that's how you know you're changing," she said. "When you start being forgiven for things you haven't even forgiven yourself for yet." He paused, looking down at her. "Ariel, if I could undo every hurt I caused." "You can't," she said softly, interrupting. "And I don't want you to. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't broken first." "And you," he asked, "what did breaking teach you?" "That surviving isn't enough," she said. "You have to build something after the pain or it wins." Later, as the event began, the guests filled the courtyard. Reporters asked questions, flashbulbs popped, but Ariel's speech silenced the noise. "I was once invisible in this very house," she said, her voice steady. "I cleaned rooms that weren't mine, served people who never looked me in the eye, and believed my worth was gone. But today, this place stands for everyone who's ever been told their story ended with pain. It doesn't. It begins when you decide to rewrite it." The audience clapped, and cameras turned to Pablo, who stood slightly behind her, his expression unreadable yet softened by something deeper than pride. When it was his turn to speak, he hesitated before taking the microphone. "I don't deserve this platform," he began. "For years, I built my life on fear, and I called it loyalty. I thought control was love, and I used that lie to justify everything I did. But one person, one woman, refused to see me as the man I pretended to be. She saw what was left of my soul when I thought there was nothing left to save. So today, I don't speak as Pablo Vero, the businessman or the man who made headlines. I speak as someone who finally learned what love really means, responsibility. If you love someone, you protect their peace, not their silence." The crowd fell quiet. Ariel's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. After the ceremony, as guests began to leave, the two of them walked through the garden one last time together. The sky was streaked with gold, the kind of sunset that promised renewal. "Do you think people like us ever really escape our past?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "But we learned to stop being ruled by it. Your past built you, Pablo. Mine broke me. But together, we found a way to make it mean something." "And what does it mean now?" he asked. "That love isn't about what you take from someone," she said softly. "It's about what you build after the damage." He stopped walking, his voice quieter now. "You think we could ever start over? Not as what we were, but as who we are now." She looked at him, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe not start over," she said, "but we can begin again. That's different. Beginning again means we already know what we don't want to lose this time." He nodded, understanding. "Then let's begin again, even if all that means is peace between us." "Peace is enough," she said. "It's what I prayed for when everything else felt impossible." As they reached the steps of the mansion, Pablo turned to her one last time. "You once told me pain can be a teacher," he said. "What do you think it's taught us?" She thought for a moment, her eyes meeting his. "That redemption doesn't erase the past," she said. "It redeems how we live after it." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made him look almost like a different man. "Then maybe I've finally learned my lesson." "Maybe," she said softly. "But learning is just the start. Living it, that's the rest." That night, when the lights went out and the mansion grew quiet again, Ariel walked through the halls, touching the framed photographs of women the foundation had helped. She paused in front of one picture, a group photo taken earlier that day. In the corner, barely smiling but unmistakably present, was Pablo. She whispered, "Thank you, not for his money or his protection, but for the change he had chosen." Outside, rain began to fall, not like the storm that had started their story, but soft, cleansing, almost gentle. It was as if the city itself was exhaling. In a city built on power and blood, he found something stronger than fear, a woman who refused to be owned. And she found something stronger than pain, a man willing to change. The scene holds there, time stretching just long enough to feel the peace they both fought for. Sometimes love doesn't look like forever, the voice continues. Sometimes it's just the moment you stop running from who you've been and decide to start over, free. Pablo sat in his car that night, watching the raindrops trace lines across the windshield. He thought about how far he'd come, from a man who once ruled through silence to a man learning how to speak with kindness. He started the engine but didn't drive off right away. He just whispered to himself, "She was never just my maid." In her room upstairs, Ariel stood by the window, looking out at the same rain, whispering, "And he was never just my boss." They didn't end with promises. They ended with peace. And sometimes, that's what love is, the quiet between two people who finally understand each other's scars. If you believe love can rewrite a man's story, share this film. If you're still here, drop "I'm still watching" in the comments, because this story was for you. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel as a form of encouragement. Where are you watching from? Drop your locations in the comments below. What story do you want to be covered in the next video?